there is growing evidence that President Donald J. Trump is on board with the necessity of such an effort. To be sure, as we have talked about on previous programs of this series, the president has been expressing his enthusiastic respect for the Chinese Communist dictator Xi Jinping. He has indicated to his team, his administration, notably in the hands of his enforcer, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, that he doesn't want any jeopardizing of a so-called trade truce that has been fashioned with the Chinese, specifically for the purposes of obtaining from them continued supplies of rare earth minerals that have been processed and are necessary for so much in our modern industrial activity. But the president, notwithstanding what some are describing as cognitive warfare against the Chinese, seems to be taking a series of steps that are leading to, or certainly helpful with respect to, the larger effort of ending the threat we face from communist China. So this program is devoted to assessing the question of, is POTUS, the President of the United States, rolling back the Chinese Communist Party? To give us an overview of the state of play, I'm very pleased to be able to summon via video a man who has frequently helped us do level setting on the topic of the day. His name is Captain James Fennell, United States Navy, retired. In his last duty station in his distinguished Navy career, he was the Chief of Intelligence and Information Operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. From that vantage point, he did incalculably important work assessing and warning of the rising danger from the Chinese military and the party that it is supporting, namely the CCP. He is these days a senior fellow with the Geneva Center for Security Policy and the proprietor of an important Google group called Storm Risen. We had a chance to speak with him via an interview I did with him the other day on Securing America. We have been privileged to be able to use a clip from that for the purposes of this webinar, and let's go to that tape now.
Stepping back from his first term's strategic view of the PRC as a strategic adversary, a threat. And I think some people were concerned about, the TikTok deal and language of, he's my friend, all this stuff. And I think people got, sidetracked for whatever reason on those statements, and they didn't look at the actual actions. And so when you actually look at the actions that this president is taking towards the PRC, it reminds me so much of Teddy Roosevelt and the speak softly but carry a big stick. Now, we don't have a big stick in everything, like you mentioned, in the processing of rare earth elements. And so the president understands that we had a lack of processing capability for those critical supplies for our military. And so I think he's been trying to buy some time with this trade truce to be able to keep us having access to those processed materials until we could develop our own organic capacity to do so, or with our allies. But things that have shown that he's actually got the PRC in his sights is precisely what we saw this weekend with the the abduction operation against Maduro. And the fact of what we heard from Secretary Rubio on Sunday's talk shows, where he specifically said, read our national security strategy. We are going to enforce our defense of the Western Hemisphere, hemispheric defense, and we are not going to allow our adversaries to have access to precious resources like the oil and energy that is in Venezuela, the largest reserve of oil of any nation on the planet. And then he said, Rubio said, and China. And he mentioned China first. So the president won't say that he's going to cut China off from access to oil, but it's very clear that this is in fact what is happening, is now China is going to have to go through the United States of America to regain any kind of access to oil in that region, which gives us a great bargaining chip when it comes to things like rare earth elements. So I think that's one area. Another area was just also this weekend where he canceled the chip deal, almost a $3 million chip deal, because it was going to a suspect Chinese company that had ties to the Chinese Communist Party. The recently announced National Defense Authorization Act puts restrictions on outbound investments from the United States into China and requires reporting on any kind of sales that could be considered dual use. We'll have to see how that goes in terms of follow-up and oversight of that, but that's now law, which we didn't have before. There's a lot of other things, in my opinion, for me as a Navy person, the announcement in the end of the December of the new Golden Fleet and the new battleship. And some people may argue about the battleship, but what the real strategic statement is that the United States recognizes that we have atrophied our naval power. And Samuel Eliot Morison said, you need to have naval power if you're going to survive as a great power. And President Trump understands that, and he's now going to put resources into rebuilding our fleet, which is vitally important to be able to carry out hemispheric defense and protect our shores and protect our trade around the world and those of our allies. He's also gone out and reached out to our allies and asked them to help us do certain things in the Western Pacific. He's made a fantastic trip to Japan and reignited our close relationship with Japan, and they're stepping up their defense budget now. They're going to have a 9% increase year on year in their defense spending, something that they hadn't done before, even with Prime Minister Abe. Now Prime Minister Takaichi is building up. They can do more, but a 9% increase year on year is fantastic. That can be attributed to the Trump administration's, direct involvement with our allies. So, and then there's things about just little comments here and there where the president has talked about, where he mentions that he's not going to allow China to have access to Greenland. He's worried about Greenland because Russia and China are operating up in that area. So he's asked, India not to buy oil from Russia like China's buying. So they've stopped and reduced that. It's a statement to China in a way. He's pushed back on Xi's notion of a global governance initiative. The idea that Xi and the Chinese Communist Party are going to be the arbiters of a global government is ridiculous. And this operation this weekend sank that. I mean, many people here in Europe and people in a certain party in America, they think, and they're howling right now about America took a unilateral action. That's right. We as Americans can decide our own fate. We do not belong, there is no global government that I know of. Somebody show me the elections results and that everybody in the world voted for this new government. But we act like there is something that we should surrender our sovereignty to a thug regime in Beijing that seeks to destroy us. So I think President Trump, he's never going to come out and say what I just said. But I think in his heart of hearts, he believes it. And he's got a plan, and it's not just military, it's economic, it's psychological. His efforts to continually speak nicely about Xi and say we got a good relationship, that's a form of cognitive warfare that you can't get anybody to really talk about. But in my estimation, it is a kind of a cognitive warfare that plays a game in Beijing and it plays a game in the international community to keep people on their back foot and not knowing what Trump will do next. And then we have to add in, I just reminded myself, Taiwan. We just passed an $11.1 billion funding bill to arms sales to Taiwan to really help them start defending themselves, because they've kind of been, like Japan and other countries in Asia, behind the power curve. So a lot of things to say that the actions, don't follow the words, follow the fist.
The way you framed it, Frank, are we rolling up the CCP? It strikes me that that is President Trump's overall strategy here. But as Jim Finnell said, that's not how he's going to articulate it. The president looks at China and sees a big, powerful nation that has nuclear weapons that can cause an immense amount of damage to the United States. In his mind, they're the ones behind COVID-19. They're the ones who declared a people's war against the United States. They're the ones who have advanced nuclear weapons, a very large standing army, and are modernizing their military in ways that are not advantageous to the United States. The president speaks in a way to put first and foremost the security of the United States first. It seems kind of obvious, or should seem kind of obvious or commonsensical, that he would do that. But he also wants to couch that, much of that, in terms of commerce, getting along, and having amicable relations with the PRC. He does believe in giving a country a chance. Despite their nefarious behavior, the president will first try to do business with them. And the first year of his administration, I think he has done, it seems pretty obvious to me that he needs rare earth minerals. He needs certain things from communist China. But with his tariff program, has laid out a pretty clear pathway to rebuilding American manufacturing. We're not there yet. It's going to take, years to do, but he wants American manufacturing so that the American middle class will have jobs. And by any observation, those manufacturing jobs are going to come from communist China back to the United States. And so he wants to play nice with communist China. He wants to do business if he can with them, wherever he can with them. And so he often speaks in a way that he makes it sound like it's business first, when in fact, it's the well-being of the American people first. And in the short run, he does need very much the rare earth minerals that communist China has. And so he has to play nice with them. We've had leaders for the past, I'll say a century, but let's just call it the last 20 years when it comes to China, 30 years, who have allowed communist China to control so much of our economic future that President Trump is very focused on recovering that for the United States. And so he's not going to do something to alienate the communist Chinese while he needs them. Now, you could say they need us too, but they're at war, and I think they've prepared for war better than we have. And so they may be prepared for a war with the United States, whereas the United States is still in the process of rebuilding our economy, and I guess most importantly here, rebuilding the American military. President Trump looks at everything that communist China can throw at us and realizes we don't yet have a national missile defense. There's advanced weapons we need, such as certain missile systems, certain aircraft, and he also realizes we don't have the Navy we would absolutely need to engage with communist China. We can get into a war with them. We can get into a shooting war, but in every scenario that the U.S. Navy has played out, we would lose a lot of aircraft carriers, we would lose a lot of men and materiel, and we probably have to use nuclear weapons in order to succeed. In which case, that's not the kind of success President Trump wants. So he's in the process of buying time, rebuilding the American economy, and rebuilding the American military, including the Navy, our nuclear forces, our missile defenses, and what have you, that we've articulated on these shows many times. And I think that overall strategy, it doesn't quite look like he's rolling up the CCP, but I think he's putting them in a box. Every day that goes by, we're becoming more proficient at what we do. We're becoming more capable. Our economy is becoming stronger with each passing day. And from a just from a strategy point of view, I think President Trump has played this, in a way brilliantly, and also the only way he could. He was not going to just give in to the communist Chinese when it came to trade. He does want to bring manufacturing back, and that is in fundamental disagreement with how communist China sees the world. So, Frank, I think I look forward to our conversation about this, but I do think I would leave the viewers with the notion that the best is yet to come, and we're getting there slowly but surely. But there was a lot of rebuilding that needed to go on and still needs to go on to get America into the position it needs to.
Thanks again to Frank Gaffney and the Committee on the Present Danger, China, for letting me do a short presentation. I'm sitting, of course, in Taiwan these days, and I've been here for about 4 years, and I've been watching China for longer than that. Frank asked us to focus on the myriad ways in which U.S. power is being exercised to the detriment of Xi Jinping and the Communist Party in China, and of course, their quest for world domination. Today, I'm going to focus on U.S. strategy using straight facts. U.S. strategy seems to take a page from the Boston Police Department in the 1990s, where murder rates doubled in 1 year due to gang violence. Faced with rising gang violence and record homicides, Boston conducted Operation Ceasefire, which launched a focused deterrence strategy targeting prolific offenders with severe, coordinated federal sanctions for gun crimes, combined with community outreach, offering pathways out of gangs, significantly reducing youth homicides, and establishing a model for other cities by linking strict enforcement with social support for at-risk groups. In other words, the police focused on one group at a time until all the gangs dramatically changed their behavior. This type of strategy is called focused deterrence. The Israelis ended up using this strategy against Iran, first decimating Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist groups in Gaza, then Hezbollah, then the Houthis. Once these terrorist groups were paralyzed, then Israel went after Iran because these other threats could no longer endanger Israel. Focused deterrence is part of deterrence theory. Perhaps a better meme for this is pulling one leg at a time off of a scorpion or a cockroach, whichever pleases your imagination, eventually making the insect unable to be a threat. The U.S. appears to be using this method against China, Russia, Iran, and possibly North Korea. What we see is going on in Iran. Once all of its terrorist collaborators were defanged, the Iranian economy started to falter. Once the U.S. disrupted Venezuela, Iran could no longer pretend that their regime was in control after wasting money on global terrorism, instead of focusing on helping their own citizens. China is guilty of the same crime. We see the U.S. removing one leg of China with Iran collapsing. Iran was selling China oil at a cheap rate, and they signed an agreement for $400 billion worth of oil for 25 years. Another leg is Venezuela, which sold over 90% of its oil to China at cheap rates. This will cause further economic stress on China. Frank mentioned unrestricted warfare. One of the categories of the CCP's unrestricted warfare is lawfare. In the case of Venezuela, President Trump and his team used lawfare against the former illegitimate President Maduro. Maduro and over 20 conspirators have been involved in narco-terrorism since 1999, when FARC transferred some of their operations from Colombia to Venezuela. President Trump's order to capture and prosecute Maduro for crimes he did against the U.S. should not be a surprise to anyone. Maduro was put on the narco-terrorism wanted list in March 2020 during Trump's first term, with a $15 million prize for someone who helps capture him. President Biden increased the rewards for his capture to $25 million prior to leaving office. And Trump's second term offered up to $50 million. after the Treasury Department sanctioned his cartel. But there's more to the story. Russian officials had suggested before January the potential supply of Oreshnik ballistic missiles, an intermediate ballistic missile, range ballistic missile, to counter U.S. regional pressure. In the context of the January 2026 U.S. military operation in Venezuela, Russian Oreshnik and caliber missiles represent asymmetric deterrence designed to offset U.S. conventional superiority through rapid strike capabilities and threats to American homeland. In other words, Trump stopped a possible Cuban Missile Crisis version 2.0, or a Venezuelan missile crisis. The Oreshnik is an intermediate-range ballistic missile characterized by its hypersonic speeds and its ability to carry multiple warheads. If deployed to northern Venezuela, the Oreshnik could reach targets in southern United States, including Florida and Washington, D.C., in less than 5 to 10 minutes. This zero-warning capability is intended to decapitate leadership or destroy high-value assets before a response can be organized. In summary, there were many reasons why Trump ordered the arrest of Maduro. With respect to China, this pulled another leg off its body. I hope we continue to do this globally. Thank you very much.
Start with the bad news, and it dovetails a little bit off of the national security strategy. So the national security strategy, of course, has a whole section about problems in Europe. The initial assumption is, when you read it, is, yeah, Europe has a bunch of problems and the continent is going to see them. But the thing is that Europe extends into other parts of the world as well, or at least European power has. And so you have France, pieces of France in the Pacific, New Caledonia, French Polynesia, Wallis Futuna, for example. And you also have, this is what I'm going to talk about, a little piece of the United Kingdom in a highly strategic location in the southern part of the Indian Ocean called the Chagos Archipelago. This is an area that was colonized first by the French and then the British. And when the countries there achieved their independence, the British held on to this archipelago of islands. And that is where they set up a military base on an island called Diego Garcia, an atoll called Diego Garcia, which became a UK base as well. And this is one of the most important US military bases on that side of the planet. It can reload nuclear submarines. It can base strategic bombers. The port is, it can service aircraft carriers. There's really nothing else like it. It's critical for Space Force. But what's happening is, at this very moment, this very week, the British government is in the process of trying to transfer sovereignty of that whole chain of islands to Mauritius, which is the people of Mauritius are ethnically, culturally, and linguistically different than the Chagosians who lived there before they were forcibly expelled by the British in the late 60s and early 70s. And those Chagosians live a little bit all over the place. Some are in Mauritius, a lot are in the UK where they took British citizenship. And the Brits are using the guise of decolonization to try to justify handing it over to Mauritius. But the deal gives no protection to the Chagosians, and there was never a referendum done. So even the United Nations is now saying this deal does not satisfy the requirements for decolonization anyway. The House of Lords put forward a kind of polling recently and asked as many Chagosians as they could what they wanted to do, and the vast majority rejected the deal, and many of them want to actually stay part of the UK, and arguably you could even set up a sort of kind of compact of free association agreement for it. What does this mean? Why panic about this? Well, from the moment the treaty is signed and sovereignty is transferred to Mauritius, the United States has a problem. Mauritius signed the African Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, which prohibits the stationing, development, researching of nuclear weapons on its territory. So immediately, the U.S. is likely to be in contravention of that, which opens it up to all sorts of challenges. But the bigger deal is the treaty includes a lease for the base, which is 99 years. And the British are going to have to pay, by some estimates, about 35 billion pounds over 99 years in annual installments to continue to be able to use the base. And as per the treaty, if the British miss one payment, the lease can be revoked. In fact, the whole treaty can be terminated with sovereignty resting with Mauritius. And already even Nigel Farage's Reform Party is saying that they're not going to be paying. Part of the argument is, why should the British taxpayer pay to lower Mauritian taxes? The Mauritians have said they're going to use the money to lower taxes and pay down their own debt. So you're getting attacks both from the left and from the right about the payment for this treaty. It is inexplicable to me why this isn't being more widely discussed. When it was originally mooted in 2024, then Senator Marco Rubio came out very strongly against the deal. Senator Kennedy came out against the deal. Representative Waltz came out against the deal. But now there has been very little discussion about it, as the territory, the land under one of the U.S.'s most important pieces of strategic power projection capabilities is being given to a country with very close ties to China by a country with increasingly close ties to China. So that's the bad news. The good news is what we're also starting to see coming out of the national security strategy, again, I think, is in Palau, a very elegant packaging of the sort of block and build approach to dealing with locations that are being targeted by China. Palau is it's a country with a very close relationship with the U.S. It recognizes Taiwan. It's just the other side of the Philippines. It's been a target of Chinese entropic warfare, where the Chinese organized crime has been rampant. Even though the country is about 18,000 people, there's been a very high level of Chinese attempts to destabilize it through corruption, bribery, and that sort of thing. And it has agreed, if you saw it in the press, it's probably because it agreed to take in up to 75 deportees from the U.S. This was a deal signed on December 23rd. The Palauans will get to approve them on a case-by-case basis. They will have no criminal records. These are people who have been ordered deported from the U.S. but can't go back to their home country because they would be deemed at risk if that was the case. So they may go to Palau. That's the headline. But what the package actually contains is a package of blocking capabilities for Chinese penetration, so law enforcement support, cyber warfare support or defense capabilities, customs and immigration, a whole bunch of Americans who will physically go to Palau and sit alongside their Palauan colleagues and help them block Chinese illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive operations in Palau. At the same time, the U.S. is helping them build economic and social resilience through stabilizing their pension fund, helping them build a hospital. It's a new approach. There's been a lot of talk about the dissolution of USAID. What will come next? I think this is what we're starting to see, what will come next. These block and build packages that actually are going to support not only the sovereignty of the countries that receive them, but also will help Indo-Pacific security in this case, and maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific. So we've got the Europeans causing us problems in the Indian Ocean, and some very nice work from the State Department helping to reinforce security in the Pacific.
Best way to understand what's going on with Venezuela is to get out a map and take a look at it. But jump back a little bit before that as well, and consider how much attention goes on Taiwan, Japan, Korea, the Western Pacific. And it seems that most of our focus, military, politically, is out that way, and how to keep China from taking over. But while we're focused on that, over the last 20, 25 years, the Chinese have actually set up right in our backyard. They've had Cuba, for example, for at least 30 years that they use as a signals intelligence. platform. They've probably got some weapons in there as well. Moving weapons in is an easy thing if they want to do it. And it is an easy missile range of the United States. But look at Venezuela. It's even a bigger place. It's actually it's potentially economically prosperous. It's got more oil than just about any place on earth. And the Chinese have been in there since the beginning of the Chavez regime almost 25 years ago. So Chinese influence in Venezuela is near total. The Venezuelans owe them about $60 billion. They're paying it off in oil. Chinese arms and weapons are used in the Venezuelan military. Chinese influence is immense, and via their Cuban proxies, it's even more strong. It's complete. And you look at that and you combine it with, say, the influence of the Mexican drug cartels, which basically control the country, with which the Chinese government, via their fentanyl drug ring, has pretty much total control of the place. And they've killed 3/4 of Americans already just via fentanyl. You look at Chinese influence in the rest of Latin America. And 20 years ago, the United States was the main trading partner, the main economic power down there. Now you look at the map of it, in every single country in Latin America, it's China that is the #1 trade partner, except for one, and I believe that's Paraguay. And that comes along with the economic influence, the political influence, and you've shifted a continent which at least was not in China's camp, even if it was not entirely pro-America. You've shifted it in China's direction, and the so-called Belt and Road Initiative has built ports all over the place. Nobody wants to think about it, but they've got ports, access to airfields, and they've got a satellite tracking station down in Argentina, in Patagonia. That is Chinese territory. By the agreement, Argentinians are not allowed to even go into that place. So that helps China's surveillance networks, its missile targeting, etc. Go up into the Caribbean. You find similar Chinese influence as well via promises of economic advantage, and they subvert the ruling classes up there as well. And you look at this, and from a Chinese perspective, it all makes great sense. It's that old Maoist strategy of seizing the countryside to have the cities fall. In this case, the city is the United States, and they have quietly gone about emplacing themselves to the point that they surround us. And if you look beyond that, look at the Azores, where they've been after old American air bases out there, up in Greenland. Well, the Chinese are there, and there's a reason why President Trump and the administration would want to make sure that Greenland doesn't come into sort of Chinese control. So this is all about a slow, steady takeover by the Chinese of Latin America, the Caribbean, so that they can be in a position to destroy us, defeat us, or certainly make it so that we can't move. And there's a psychological, political aspect to everything that you've seen. It suddenly looks as if the Americans are onto the Chinese game and are doing something about it. And it's not the end of the sort of end of things now that Maduro's been removed, but it does show that this placid victim that America was playing for so long isn't quite so ready to give up. And that is an important outcome of this, but much remains to be done. But the Chinese have had their way in Latin America and Central America and elsewhere for the last 20, 25 years, and the only thing that has slowed them down is the appearance of Donald Trump. So it's about time America paid attention to Latin America. So while everyone's looking at the Western Pacific, you better pay attention down south to our own neighborhood, and that is what this administration is doing.
Happy New Year to everybody, and I just want to commend everybody in this webinar. This is a phenomenal resource, and anybody who's new to watching this really needs to tune in on a regular basis. You're not going to get better information anywhere else. So I want to encourage everybody. There really has been a lot of talk on our side about the president not being steadfast on some of these issues. And I really marvel at it. I don't understand the mindset. Donald Trump telegraphs absolutely everything, and he has been for decades. Go back and read The Art of the Deal. If you want to understand how he uses distraction, how he uses confusion to be laser focused toward his ends, he's been telling you in print, in The Art of the Deal in '87, in Surviving at the Top in 1990, in The Art of the Comeback in 1997, in 9 other books that I can think of off the top of my head, and 15 years of The Apprentice on national network television. Donald Trump has been telling you how he negotiates. So of course he's flattering Xi Jinping. Of course he flatters Putin. Of course he smacks Zelensky around a little bit. Of course all these things take place because they keep his opponents off balance. They are constantly forcing people to react to things that aren't even necessarily real, and yet the aim is laser focused. We have seen Donald Trump do the most wonderful thing in American foreign policy in our lifetimes since Reagan, in that he actually puts America's interests first, and he actually sees that as a moral good instead of something to be upset about. We spent a good bit of the 2000s listening to leftists and neocons alike tell us that there was something wrong with, war for oil or whatever. But in reality, a lot of contracts in Iraq went to people who shouldn't have gotten them because America was squeamish about the obvious. And the truth is, Iraq would be better off if it had had more American financial support from the private sector, not the public sector, to develop with our technology the oil fields it has, the infrastructure it needs. That would have been better for them, and it would have been better for us. Venezuela, we're not apologizing. We're going to take back the assets that the socialists stole. And we're going to call it that. It was stealing. Nationalization is a pretty Marxist word that means theft. And we're not going to take it anymore. We're not going to take it in Venezuela. We're not going to take it anywhere else. That's the new normal. Get used to it, folks. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put China back on its heels, and Donald Trump is the first American president since Richard Nixon to actually understand that China is the enemy. China is not our friend. China could be more of a frenemy than not, but it cannot be our friend. Not with a communist regime in power. Will never happen. So, what do? You put them in a box. You take away the ability to act decisively. You make the steel more expensive than it's worth. Now, if we had continued in Biden think and Obama think, it wouldn't be very long until we saw that rapidly growing Chinese Navy based in the Caribbean. And this is an absolute vital aim of the Chinese regime, to duplicate the first island chain against America. And not just in the Caribbean. Frank and I were talking about this the other day on Securing America, how they wish to duplicate the first island chain in space as well, with control of the lunar South Pole, the Lagrange points, and a lot of other key real estate that, frankly, most people aren't thinking about yet, may not even understand what or where they are, but they're absolutely crucial to controlling the human future. The communists absolutely believe in their own worldview and the extension of that worldview to dominate the human future. We must also believe in ours. The American Revolution is the only true revolution in human history. All of the so-called communist revolutions, and if some of you may have poli-sci, government, other kinds of degrees that are in departments dominated by Marxists, like I do, you know that we are told very, very adamantly that the American Revolution was just a colonial uprising, replacing one elite with another. And the true revolutions are Cuba and France and Russia and, back in the day when I was in college, Nicaragua and, all these crazy things. The truth is the exact opposite. Marxism has always been and always will be entirely a marketing scam. It exists to give people the illusion of power, to give vent to their envy, and transfer power from one elite to a new one. That new elite dominates whatever it can. And as Margaret Thatcher said, the problem with socialism is that eventually it runs out of other people's money. This is what makes it dangerous to everyone else. The Soviets understood in the same way that Hitler understood that their regime could not survive in the long run without expansion. The Chinese understand the same thing. The Chinese, however, are under a very different constraint, which is a growing demographic collapse that we're going to see tip over in this next 10 to 15 years. The reality is that at their current total fertility rate, they are on track to lose 75% of their population by the end of the century. And the leading edge of that is going to be ugly, because you're going to have a very, very significant bubble in old people who have to be supported by a dramatically shrinking workforce. And they are trying to compensate for that through technology, and they will be somewhat successful with that. The problem for them is that robots do not buy cars and houses. So they actually solve their problem, if they can solve their problem, in a way that doubles down on their need to be able to export. An attack on Taiwan means they can't export. And that's the reality Donald Trump is driving home. He's putting them more and more in a box. The Taiwan arms deal that we just saw last month, biggest arms deal we've ever given Taiwan. And if it were up to me, we'd do many times that. But biggest arms deal we've done. It's all defensive weaponry that is aimed at the landing craft that would have to cross the Formosa Strait. They can't possibly conduct an invasion if we can blow up their army in the water. And that's what this deal does. And in point after point after point, we are reducing China's ability to project power. We are reducing China's ability to threaten its neighbors. In so doing, we put them in a position where they are even more export dependent and they have to play ball. That doesn't mean that they will. That doesn't mean this will work. It means that this is the strategy. It has been consistent from the beginning. The president couldn't have been clearer since long before he was ever a candidate for president. And this is where we're going now. Now, every president between Nixon and Trump took a radically different view of this. We created this monster. This is our fault. And you can understand where Nixon was. You can understand where Reagan was. They were dealing with a very different world. But the presidents post-Cold War have just absolutely lost their ever-loving minds on this. They created the next Cold War, and there was no need to do so at all. Donald Trump was watching it all along, understood it all along, and is now taking steps to shove the monster back in its cave. That is the consistent policy. Do not be fooled by the distractions. Again, go back and do the homework. Watch the first season of The Apprentice. Reread The Art of the Comeback. It's obvious what he's doing to keep everybody off balance while he relentlessly and persistently pursues this policy. And he is, and he will, and I'm very, very bullish on the next 3 years, and assuming we don't screw it up in the midterms and in 2028, the next decade, as China finds itself in a position that it can't easily get out of and doesn't have any good options to get out of that box through force. That's what we're trying to pull off, and I'll just leave it on that. Donald Trump understands that if they have good options to use force to get out of their box, they will. They absolutely will. The next decade is the most dangerous. Don't misunderstand. I'm a member of the Committee on the Present Danger for a reason. I'm not saying they're not a threat. I'm saying that because of these constraints, they are more of a threat for the next decade than they're ever going to be again. But we can reduce the risk by increasing their risk. We can put them more and more in a box. We can keep them off balance. We can make the trade relationship valuable enough, but in a U.S. direction that they really can't afford to mess with it. And that is exactly what this president is trying to do. I am thrilled with the consistency of the Trump administration, but and really only more so by the fact that he actually has personnel this term to implement, unlike the many in the first term who were actively working against him. It's a miracle he got anything done. This time is different, and I think that America's best days are stunningly ahead.
Described the Chinese as essentially in a box and effectively foreclosed from using military force against us. I wanted to give you a chance to opine on that question. You mentioned the lack of a missile defense on our part as a possible consideration. But I'd also like to ask you to talk about, and maybe our other guests would as well, something that's been weighing on many of us and many of these programs, for that matter, in the Committee on the Present Danger China, namely the presence inside the United States, thanks to Joe Biden's open borders, of a very large number. I think you have in the past cited 200,000 Chinese military-aged, unaccompanied men who are described by people who are pretty proficient at these sorts of things as likely People's Liberation Army Special Forces elements. Your thoughts about the threat that that represents inside this country and whether that might alter the calculations that Rod's just described that are positive indeed.
So the Chinese are operating either out of desperation or a certain confidence. If they can't do something, it's because they think they're not capable yet, or they think they have other ways of getting to us. If over the Biden years, 200,000 Chinese men of military age came into the country, and that's what this country believes happened, this government believes happened, that's of great concern. Those 200,000 men look like they are special forces, or at least could be special forces. They're living in our country today. Do we have 200,000 special forces of the United States trying to find them and root them out? Today they're in the country. They're prepared to do, if they're special forces, sabotage, murder, mayhem, whatever it takes in order to achieve their military objective. They're running grow houses of marijuana around the country. They're part of criminal syndicates. And today we're not rooting them out. That should be of deep concern to us. The Chinese, Rod mentioned a few things, which many things which I agree with, a couple things which I disagree with, but I think we probably end up in agreement. They're Marxists, yes. This is not just marketing. This is an actual ideological belief. There are Marxists in China. There are Marxists still today in Russia. There are Marxists throughout Europe, and there's Marxists in the United States. None of these people believe in human dignity and the ideals of individual freedom and liberty that our forefathers did. They are a serious bunch. They are not clowns. They are people who, if given power, will actually exercise it in the most vicious way possible. And we have to be forever mindful of that. These are people who aspire to be dictators, and we in the United States need to take them very seriously. They're not going to collapse of their own accord. They're going to keep on fighting wherever they can. And I think Rod agrees with that. My deep concern here is only partly communist China, but rather the United States itself and our inability to get things right. President Trump is committed to getting them right. But President Trump is part of a movement to fundamentally change the United States from the path we've been on for the past 100 years, the progressive project that has dominated the United States. And today we don't have a Congress that is backing his hand. We don't have a Republican Party that agrees with him. You look at big parts of the political right in the United States, and they long for the day that President Trump is gone, and where they can get back to a globalist, progressive counterparty, as it were, to the Democrats. And the odds of us who care about President Trump and the country, the odds of Republicans winning this fall are probably pretty slim. And the reason mostly is the Republicans just aren't very good. They're not very good at defending the president's policies, and they don't have very good policies of their own. There are a few good congressmen and senators here and there. The vast majority are pretty weak. You'll know if we can succeed if they get rid of the filibuster and start making into law some of the president's more radical and necessary proposals to get our elections right and to get some of this defense spending right and actually take seriously the threats to the country. I don't see that happening just yet. The odds of them helping the president build an administration by passing his nominees, that's not going on today. A Republican-controlled Senate is not making that a reality. And so even though you have President Trump and all of his good ideas, you don't have a Republican Party behind him. And that's something that is should be of great concern to anybody who believes in these policies and believes in the threat against the country. I say all that partly because you accuse me of being an optimist, Frank. And although I'm an optimist overall, I am quite pessimistic in the short run about some of the things that are going on in this country and the lack of support President Trump has, and just the fecklessness of the Republican Party and their ability to articulate why they should be in power today. And so the president has big challenges politically. He's dealing with foreign powers abroad who seek to harm us in very significant ways, and he's dealing at home with a domestic challenge in the Democrats who have lost their minds and have completely abandoned any notion of Republican forms of government, and a Republican Party that itself doesn't believe in itself. So we have a lot of work to do this year to get these things right. And that's one of the reasons we have these webinars, and hope that the people who are watching it can spread these ideas and join us, frankly, in getting these things right.
That the president is determined to roll back or roll up the Chinese Communist Party. You have been chronicling and warning about and making recommendations as to what should be done instead in what you have described, and I think it's a brilliant insight, as the true western frontier of the United States of America. And essentially it's the Central Pacific and islands there that we have fought and in many cases not only bled over but died on to wrest from the control of enemies of this country, notably the Imperial Japanese. Quickly, Cleo, what should President Trump add to his to-do list of the things that are countering the threat we face from the Chinese, thwarting their political warfare and other forms of unrestricted warfare, in particular in places like the Confederation of the Northern Marianas, that is not being attended to just yet and that is urgently needed as part of this more comprehensive effort to secure our country in the face of the Chinese communist threat?
The first thing that needs to be done is We have to stop Chinese arriving without a visa in the United States of America. So the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, which consists of islands like Saipan and Tinian, where so many Americans died during Second World War. It's a U.S. territory. These are U.S. citizens. It's the only part of the United States where Chinese jurisdiction is by China. There was a Chinese casino that was set up there that was running billions of dollars within months through that economy, completely distorted the politics and economics locally, and still does to this day. The woman that represents the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands in Congress is pushing for a lifting of the cap on direct flights from mainland China into the Marianas, including into Guam. This is a gaping open wound. The Marianas, just to give an idea of how strategic they are, share a maritime boundary with Japan to the north and with Guam to the south. And at least in the hundreds, Mr. Kennedy was talking about the Chinese that are coming in illegally. These guys are coming in legally and then illegally taking boats the 60 miles to Guam, where they're being found on the U.S. military bases and all sorts of stuff like that. This can be changed in an instant by Homeland Security. Secretary Noem can change it right out of the box. And the other thing is the person that represents the U.S. government, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Insular Affairs at the Department of Interior, which is a political appointment, is a guy from that same jurisdiction who the FEC found took money from the Chinese Communist Party for his electoral campaigns. This guy there needs to be a proper background investigation into him and his role, because he is the point guy for the negotiations with the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, Guam, Palau, Federated States of Micronesia, and Marshall Islands, the most sensitive strategic pieces of geography. That is the buffer zone between the Americas and Asia. And when we got it wrong the last time, 100,000 Americans died trying to resecure that zone. So need to make sure that the people who are on the U.S. side are working for the best interests of the United States, and just immediately close that loophole. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you tell us the name of the individual at the
his name is Angel Demipan, and he was chief of staff of a governor under whose jurisdiction.
Corrupt, I think, was the word you were struggling over.
Allegedly corrupt. Yeah. So he had Angel Demipan was chief of staff for Governor Ralph Torres, who the subsequent governor asked for an investigation into, because at least $1.6 billion worth of U.S. government money has gone unaccounted for. Some of it looks like janitorial services that were being charged at things like $4,000 an hour. I think they're going to make Minnesota look like pikers at this point. So this urgently needs investigation. That's right.